Okay. So module 11 um, is all about dysarthria. So this is our introduction to dysarthria. Really cool module because we dive into a different side of being a speech therapist, right? Right now, we've talked about a lot of things that you probably are already experienced in your life, right? Everybody knows a kid with an articulation delay or disorder at some point in time. Everybody has met a child who maybe doesn't say all their speech sounds, right? But dysarthria is a little bit different. And it's something that I know personally I haven't gotten to experience a lot out in the therapeutic world. So I think it's really cool that we're talking about it. Um, so yeah, we'll first go into some assignment discussion and feedback. And then what I'm going to do is make sure that we understand some of those basic concepts, and then we'll dive into dysarthria together. So for some feedback for our assignments and discussions, one thing I'm noticing is often I'm seeing the use of the IPA slashes using like SH inside instead of using our IPA symbol, the correct IPA symbol, right? So making sure that you're paying attention to using the right IPA symbols when you're doing this is important, right? It demonstrates knowledge of the course material. So A, that's part of your rubric. But not only that, and the other reason for these, for course reasons, when you come to your final, you're going to have to use the IPA in your final as well, right? So if you have to refresh yourself beforehand, you're obviously not going to do as well as if you are using it throughout the whole course. By the end of the course, you should be very fluent in the IPA because you've used it for a whole semester. So make sure to continue to use it within your assignments and in the discussion. Um, Lastly, it's good for your career. We're taking this course because we want to be speech language pathologists or speech language pathology assistants. And while you are doing that, you're going to have to use these symbols later on. So staying up to date with them is important. Okay, so dysarthria. In order to understand dysarthria, dysarthria impacts the motor aspects of your speech production. Okay, so we first have to understand some of our medical concepts, our basic concepts. So, two areas we have the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Central nervous system, you'll see written as CNS, right? And that's the brain and the spinal cord. So you want to think of this as like the command center. This is where all of your information is processed, right? These are your upper motor neurons as well. UPN. Nope. Upper. I just spelled up. UMN, upper motor neurons. Right. So think again, this is your control center. This is where I kind of think of the movie Inside Out with the little people inside a little bit in my head. It's not about your emotions, but I think about a person like pulling strings for you to move. But so your central nervous system um, includes that brain and spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system includes the nerves that run from the brain or spinal cord to the muscles, right? So this is the messenger network of the nerves throughout your whole body. It connects to the limbs and organs. It is not part of your limbic system, but it does connect to all of those. So you want to think about this and think about your lower motor neurons, your LMN. Okay, so to summarize, CNS, brain and spinal cord, and that's your upper motor neurons, UMN. Your PNS is your peripheral nervous system, and that's what comes off of your brain or spinal cord to the muscles, and that's your lower motor neurons. Okay, um, so dysarthria. This is damage to that CNS or PNS, right? And the aspects of the impaired speech and dysarthria depend on the location of the damage. Okay. Again, anytime we're dealing with dysarthria, we are dealing with the motor aspect, the movement. Okay. Strength, speed, timing, direction, and range of motor speech movements is impacted with dysarthria. Okay. And you need to have an understanding of what's typical of the different types of dysarthria and have a general understanding of the therapy versus memorizing the neurological deficit, right? And also remembering that we have to think about the dysarthria name comes from the areas damaged as well as how the speech sounds. Um, Now, I will say in our lecture, there are examples of each type of dysarthria. My suggestion would be to download, there's a great graph and chart at the beginning of that read and review section of the module, where it really has like your information broken out for each dysarthria. I would look at that, read it, and then listen to the speech and make your own notes, right? The things that are going to help you remember. Um, so flaccid dysarthria, think weak. This is weak. These are your lower motor neurons. And you usually see hypernasality because the inability to close that velum and distorted and omitted phonemes. We have a breathy voice quality as well at the same time. Let me make sure. 1 second. There. Okay. Much better. Um, So the muscles are weak and limp with flaccid, right? So think of flaccid weakness. Our next type of dysarthria we talk about is spastic dysarthria. And this comes from bilateral damage to the bilateral upper motor neurons. Um, Sorry, I'm looking at too many documents at one time. So overall, you have a harsh or hoarse voice quality, distorted phonemes, and assimilated hypernasality. So think of spastic is more like muscle spasms, right? That's the way that I kind of think of that one. Ataxic, this is our drunk sounding speech. So we have damage to the cerebellum and the tracts leading to and from it, right? And when we think about the the cerebellum is responsible for refining and coordinating muscle movements. So if you have this ataxic dysarthria, your speech sounds explosive and ill coordinated and jerky. It's not fluid and flowing, um, like like you would see typically in a person without dysarthria. Hypo, so we have hypokinetic and then you have hyperkinetic. So those are two different types. Hypo, reduced, right? Hypo is reduced, hyper is extra. So knowing your Latin roots right there help you, or Latin prefixes helps you a lot, okay? So hypokinetic, you see it often in Parkinson's disease. And Parkinson's disease is caused by a degeneration of the substantia nigra, which causes problems with the production of dopamine. And that is necessary for the execution of movements. Hypo means reduced, like I said. I'm just making sure I'm hitting all of the points. And then with Parkinson's, it's often short rushes of speech, breathy, and articulation tremors. We have reduced volume, imprecise articulation. It sounds a little bit more like a mumble. So it's reduced, right? Then we have hyper, which is more. So there's extra involuntary movements going on in hyper. Hypo is not doing enough movement. And that's damage to your extra pyramidal system, right? And this is primarily with your basal ganglia. This causes some prosodic disturbances, unwanted sounds that occur. It can be quick or slow. Vocally, here is very harsh. And then prosody, prosody, like I said, those prosody disturbances or abnormalities Prosody is the music of our voice. So it's the up and down that you hear. So with that, your prosody is abnormal. That flow that makes you kind of pay attention. When somebody talks without any prosody, it's a very flat affect almost. It's almost hard to do as a person who doesn't always speak without prosody in their voice. Um, and then you have your most common, which is mixed, right? So this is where you have two or more of the pathologies that we talked about occurring simultaneously. You can have a change in a type over time, and your characteristics of your dysarthria might change over time, especially when we're talking about like Parkinson's, right? That's not going to maintain the same level the whole time. So you could change and have differing speech. Um, so those are your different types of dysarthria. I feel like normally I share a lot of stories and information about making it feel like how do we touch this without actually seeing it, right? So the videos this week I thought were really good, but the other thing that I did want to touch on is if I was a therapist and I had a person who had dysarthria on my caseload, what would I do, right? So one of the things I do is I subscribe to speechpathology.com. Now, this is one of many different websites, but I enjoy this one. And I would go on and look at the different CEUs that they have about dysarthria and dysarthria treatment, right? The other things that I would use overall, and I want to share my screen. So first I would go to ASHA, and this is actually, this website here was linked to your read and review this week. So what it is it goes through what is dysarthria, all about it. What are your signs, right? Causes, how do you test for it? So as a speech language pathologist, right, testing is within my scope of practice. So I could read through this, gain some more access to information, make sure that I feel confident making clinical decisions before working with this patient. But overall, I could do that, right? So testing for dysarthria, treatment, and then tips for talking with someone who has dysarthria, which this gives me a great treatment plan too, right? Okay, how do we help them? Um, how do we help them navigate, right? So one way would be to, before you start a conversation, tell a new listener that you have trouble talking, right? Then we can work on, okay, so in therapy, we can work on how are we going to introduce ourselves and make sure that our conversational partner understands why we sound drunk, even though we are not, because we have a toxic dysarthria, right? How do we introduce ourselves is a way that we can go through the beginning of therapy. And so there's a lot of information on here that I can gather information from. The other area that I really like is these ASHA evidence maps. So on here, the one that I just had up actually was really cool. Um, it has, so it goes through different research articles and explains to you what they found within the research article, and then you can find the research article as well. So let me find. Let's just do communication outcomes and clinical expertise. Oh, didn't come up with anything. Fun. Okay, so one of the ones that just came up, I can click on and look at is voice-assisted technology is a potential tool for addressing speech and voice concerns experienced for people with Parkinson's disease, right? And when we just talked about our our different types of dysarthria, when we're talking about Parkinson's, does anyone remember which dysarthria Parkinson's is associated with?
Hypokinetic.
Hypo, yes.
Hypo.
I was looking at my notes too to double check. Yes, hypokinetic, right? So we know we're looking at that hypokinetic, and hypo means reduced, so a lack of movement with that. Um, and it goes through, I think it's really cool, like what did the article find? So then I can say, okay, maybe that's not the right treatment plan for me, right? There is limited emergent evidence that voice assisted technology can be used as an objective feedback tool to increase intelligibility. Right. So, okay, we're not really using that as a way to give feedback um, for this client. So, I would take my time to do some research. And I just wanted to show some of the areas where I would look in order to gain more information if I was a person who's starting to work with someone with dysarthria. Dysarthria. The other place that I went was the Mayo Clinic because they do have good information. And I just wanted to see for me, from a medical side, what would a doctor be explaining that's a little bit different than what I would be explaining. So then I understand where some of those gaps are, right? So I went through this as well. Um, yeah, so just so you know, some thinking, I figured that was the best way to demonstrate just how do we go about some of the areas of therapy. Yeah. So if you have any questions, please feel free to message me, email me, any of the above. I will say I will be out of town Thursday through Monday with limited access to the computer. So if you do message me during the time, I might not be available and get back to you as quickly as I normally do. And I appreciate you understanding.